Hello, everyone. I'm back again. Thank you to those who are still watching. Today, I want to talk about money worries. I was watching a video recently of a family back home in Zimbabwe. It was some elderly parents who were talking about how happy they were that their children had built them a home, installed solar, and basically made their lives very comfortable. And one thing they kept saying was, it's so important to make your parents happy, look after your parents, don't forget your parents, etc., etc. And I completely agree with that, in the sense that if you are capable of helping and looking after your parents, you should. But that comes at a cost. Let's not pretend that just because you've left the country, you have a bottomless pit of money that you can just access and be able to give your parents everything. We all want to be able to look after our parents and make sure they're comfortable, because that is our way as Africans. I think most of the people I am addressing are Africans. So our experiences are probably similar, whether you're Zimbabwean, Nigerian, Ghanaian, you probably have similar experiences to what a Zimbabwean in the diaspora would have. So the cost, coming back to the cost of caring for parents that you've left behind at home, wherever home may be. It essentially means having two households that you have to provide for financially. And if you are that one person that's looking after your parents back home, as well as trying to look after your own family, wherever you are in the diaspora, you have to be really switched on and inventive about how you're going to make that happen. I've spoken with people sometimes and said, okay, what would happen if you dropped dead today? What would happen to your parents? The income that you are providing them, would there be a way for them to keep getting that income, or would that be the end of it? Would they have to figure out a way to carry on after you die? That is a big worry. And then talking about when you first arrive, I can't quite remember how I felt when I first arrived in the UK in 2001. I was 19 years old. My worries and concerns were very different to what they were when I first arrived in America. When I was 19, I had no children. I was just trying to figure out how I'm going to, set myself up as an adult. When I arrived in America, I was a parent. I was a very grown-up adult with a life. And I started to think, okay, if I drop dead today, what will become of my children? Will they be looked after? Like financially, what will happen? How will things pan out? And so one of the first things I did as soon as I arrived was look into insurance. And I'm not going to be selling any products or, insurance products, but I think I want to share the concerns that I had and how I made myself feel less anxious and satisfied that I had done what I could to make sure my children would be provided for if I dropped dead, because that could happen. Anything could happen, and I think it hit me even more so because we were in an American town where there were hardly any Black people. And then just the realization that we are very far from any family members. The closest people that were Zimbabwean were 90 minutes away in Las Vegas. And how I got to know that they were there was I was in touch with a girl I went to school with. She was living in Las Vegas, and she said to me, there's a community here of Zimbabweans. And so it became very important for me to get connected with those people. And connecting with them made me feel so much less anxious. But still you have those worries about, okay, if something was to happen to me, if I couldn't work, if I died, I'm far from home, what would happen? So I got life insurance. And at the time, it was so cheap. I think the way it was calculated was based on what I was earning at that time. And so I wanted a term life insurance policy, which means that I would pay it for a term, a number of years in my life. And I wanted it to cover the time period during which especially my kids would still be kids and not able to look after themselves. And so this policy, it was a term life insurance policy, and it was only $14.98 per month. So I got one for myself and I got one for my then husband. By the way, I don't have another husband, I'm divorced. But yeah, I got one for myself and I got one for my ex-husband because I wanted to make sure that both our incomes would be covered. And so our children would not experience too much discomfort financially if one of us or both of us were to die. I still have that policy because I'm not giving up a policy that only cost me $14.98 a month. His cost $16, something like 49 cents a month. And to get that policy, I went on the internet, I Googled life insurance policies, and I went with the first one that came up. The first company that came up is the one that I went with. And based on our ages, our state of health, that's the quote that they gave us. And the policy would pay out a lump sum of a certain amount of money if we died. So that gave me peace of mind. I thought, okay, if something happens to either of us, at least there's going to be enough money to look after these children until they're adults and able to look after themselves. So that was one of the things that I did to relieve some of that anxiety of being in a foreign country. So, you know, I know I'm talking to a lot of people who are planning to move from one country to the other. So that's one of the things I did. I got a term life insurance policy, and I highly recommend that you do. When you look at $14 a month, that's money that you could easily waste on coffee. You know, you would only be able to get 2 coffees for $14 because coffees are so expensive. So I could buy 2 coffees and enjoy them, or I could have life insurance and have some peace of mind. Another thing that I was thinking about was, okay, if I do die, would I want to be buried here in America? Would I want to be cremated? Would I want my body repatriated back to Zimbabwe? What would I want? What would the cost of that be? And how would I have that happen? And so I think many of us know there are a few companies, especially in Zimbabwe. The most popular one that we all know is Nyaradzo, where they take care of everything. So I'm not selling any policies. I'm just talking about what's out there and some of the things that you can do to relieve some of that anxiety and have peace of mind about leaving your home country or leaving a place where you have a lot of family and friends and support around you to take care of things if it should happen that you need someone to take care of things. So Nyaradzo in Zimbabwe is, for those of you who are not Zimbabwean, it's a funeral policy, and basically they would take care of repatriating your body if you died. And depending on the type of policy you have, if you wanted to have a funeral ceremony, if that's what it's called, in that country for your friends and relatives who might also be in that country, they would do that. And then after they do that, they would then repatriate your body, and your body gets home and you have another funeral ceremony at home with your friends and family. And all that is covered by a policy. And when you look at the costs of those policies as opposed to having people do GoFundMes, because I don't think it's exclusive to Zimbabweans, where people who don't have a policy will start asking for money through GoFundMe to help repatriate a body back home. So, you know, I think it's worth having one if you don't have savings that could cover those funeral costs if you were to die far from home. Even if you were living in Zimbabwe, I think it's prudent to have one and not have people worry about your funeral. And then another thing that came up in my mind was, okay, there's so much paperwork. My children are still young. They're very, very young. What am I going to do? Well, I can't do anything if I'm dead, but you know, when you're a nurse and you work in ICU, for example, you get to be present when families talk about a family member who's dying, who happens to be your patient. And sometimes they're having to make decisions about, should we carry on trying to save this person, or decisions. So there's the medical power of attorney. Do you have a medical power of attorney? What would you want done in those instances where you're not able to make a decision for yourself because you're so ill? You know, would you want people to keep fighting until the end to save your life, even if it meant that it's not the best thing for you in terms of comfort? Maybe, you know, your disease has progressed to the point where no matter what is done, you would not survive. Do you want to be kept comfortable, or do you want people to stop and make you comfortable? So putting in place those legal instruments like a medical power of attorney, a will or a trust, you know, to say, okay, when I die, this is what I want done with my property. I want this person to receive that. I want that person to receive that. And then even just thinking about, do you want a will and a trust, or do you want a trust only? You know, what do you want? How do you want your property to be dispersed or distributed after you die, especially if you have young children? You know, you want to make sure that if you wanted them to have your property after you die, that there's something in place that makes sure that your children get those things. And then also thinking about, what is the inheritance tax where I am? You know, we know every country has inheritance tax laws. So you want to be sure that if you're leaving very valuable property, whether it's a home or large sums of money to your children, that you've accounted for that, that you've thought about that what is the best way for me to leave this property to my children? Am I putting it in a trust where they are beneficiaries, you know, where those children become beneficiaries to a trust and the property is donated to a trust where those children are the beneficiaries, and while you're alive, you're the trustee, and then you can appoint someone who then becomes a trustee after you die. And then just having a will so that people know exactly what it is you wanted done after you died. I've also heard of other things which I personally haven't done. People try and sell other types of financial instruments, like what they call a UIL. I think it's called like some kind of universal life policy. I'm not really sure what it's called, but I know it's called a UIL. And it's a type of insurance where you have it for, I think, for life, and you're able to borrow money from it. You're putting money in every month, but if you wanted to, you could borrow money from it tax-free, and then repay the money, and then there would be a death benefit, etc., etc. So I know a lot of people use that, and I know that a lot of people sell those policies. Those are a little bit more expensive, and I'm not sure about how they work or whether they're a good idea. When they explain it to you and they're trying to sell it to you, it sounds like a good idea, but I personally just have never had one because I just felt like I understood other things better. But you know, if you're someone who likes to use different types of financial instruments, then I would encourage you to look into anything that you can to, you know, relieve your anxieties about those instances where maybe you become sick or you die and you have a lot of people that depend on you financially. So I guess what I wanted to address was the things that you can do that don't cost too much money. And even if they cost money, like having your trust and your will done by a lawyer and done properly, including like a medical power of attorney, that can set you back something like $3,000. But when you look at what it would save your family after you die in terms of time and costs financially, them trying to settle your affairs, it would save them a lot of headache and heartache because they're trying to grieve you anyway, and then now they have to deal with your financial matters. So what I would really encourage people to do is, if you're coming here, think about having that as one of your priorities when you arrive. Life insurance. Get life insurance and have that reassurance, especially if you're someone who has dependents, so that if something happens to you and they're here, they're going to be looked after. And then having a will and a trust. I really recommend a will and a trust. And obviously, me being a medical professional, I also recommend a medical power of attorney so that people know exactly what your wishes would be in those instances where you could make a decision about your own health. And obviously, whoever you pick as your medical power of attorney has to be someone that you trust will really understand what your wishes would be. You know, the medical power of attorney itself can give some level of detail about what to do in certain instances. But as life, is, sometimes you have this document that you've done and you think you've covered everything that you need to cover. But then in your particular circumstances, something out of the ordinary happens. You want to make sure that your medical power of attorney is someone who truly knows you and understands what it is you would want done in those instances. So life insurance, wills, trusts, power of attorney, and then just other things to back you up if something went wrong, if you couldn't work, if you got fired. What would you have in place to cover your financial needs? So another thing you should know about being a nurse here in the US is once you're a permanent employee, you will find that your employers, in most instances, part of the benefits package that they offer you, and you don't have to sign up for benefits, but the benefits are so good that why wouldn't you? So your employer will often have as one of your benefits life insurance. So the life insurance that my employer has as a benefit for me, which I don't contribute to, they pay for that one. That one is for 3 times my salary. If I wanted to have a policy that was more than 3 times my salary, because I'm saying, well, actually, I have these other things that I also want covered, what I could do is I could contact that insurance company that my employer has my policy with and say, I want supplementary insurance, life insurance, because my assets are worth $1 million, but my employer is only covering me for $500,000. What they would then do is they would look for evidence to say that, yes, you have assets worth $1 million and they're willing to cover that. And then you would pay the extra for the supplementary life insurance. But the reassuring thing is your employer has life insurance that they're paying for you to cover 3 times your salary. So that's a lot of money. That's enough money to make sure that the people that you leave behind are taken care of and they're not suffering after you've gone. So that's one of the benefits that you would have from your employer. You could get your own insurance outside of your employer. Some people have multiple insurance policies. And I think insurance is a very, very good way of looking after your future, your children, the people that you leave behind. Sometimes, I've even seen videos where someone talked about how white South Africans built wealth through having life insurance policies. So the first generation of white South Africans who had come to South Africa from Europe, they immediately got life insurance policies. And they were not getting these policies for themselves. They were thinking about the generations that came after. And the policies that they got were the kind of policies that had a death benefit or an annuity. And what would then happen is when that first generation passed away, their children and grandchildren got the benefits from the insurance. And that is what they used to build wealth. But the way they did it was not just to say, oh yeah, when I die, you're going to get this big lump sum of money. Because, you know, sometimes when people are just given money, which they've not had to earn, they can be very reckless with it. So they were very clever. They had in place trusts and wills which stated exactly how that money would be used. So you couldn't just get the money and squander it. You would get the money and maybe there was a requirement for you to purchase land and start farming, or there was a requirement for you to buy a business, and you know, specific things were put in place to protect that money and protect future generations. So that's how they built wealth. And when you look at the cost of an insurance policy on a month-to-month basis, I think it's very, very clever. I think it's very, very prudent. And, you know, why not? Why wouldn't you do that for your future? It's probably a lot harder, in my opinion, to save a lot of money, just to save a lot of money. If you're saving, and let's say you're saying, okay, I want to save $1,000 a month for the future, for my children, so that the future generations have money. You're saving $1,000, right? That's $1,000 that you can't use during your lifetime. But if you have an insurance policy that you're paying $14.98 a month, and it's for a term of, let's say, 50 years, and when you, if you die before that 50 years is up, then your surviving benefactors, they get to inherit, let's say it's $500,000. That's $500,000 of wealth that's going to future generations in your family, which you might not have been able to save $500,000 in your lifetime, but you've essentially left them $500,000. So if you get an insurance policy that you can afford, that will still be in effect by the time you die. I mean, for me, I don't know when I'll die, but I know that both my grandmothers lived. My maternal grandmother is in her late 90s or even older, we're not sure. And then my paternal grandmother, she was very old, over 100, I think, when she died, and her older sister died after her. So those women who came before me lived long. So my insurance policy is supposed to be up until I'm about 80. So if I live as long as my grandmothers, that means my children or my benefactors may not benefit from it. But it's brought me reassurance that if I die now, my children will be taken care of. So that's how I look at it. But like I said, you don't have to have just one policy. You can have several of them to cover all the instances that come to your mind and say, okay, if this happened, this is what I would want to happen. If this happened, this is what I would want to happen. To me, it costs a lot less than trying to just save cash. Because the thing with cash is if something comes up, you're going to have to spend it. But with an insurance policy, there's no way I'm going to cancel a policy that I'm paying $14 a month. I can always afford $14 a month, but I may not always be able to save $1,000 a month. That might impact on my quality of life. You know, it might mean that I'm not able to do some things that I want to do during my lifetime when I'm still alive and healthy because I'm trying to save $1,000 for future generations. But I can definitely put aside $15, $14 a month towards a life insurance policy that gives me reassurance and possibly can provide generational wealth to my children and grandchildren. And I can stipulate in my will how I want that money used by the future generations. It's not going to be money that someone can say, oh, I think I'll buy myself a Benz because I've never had one and I've inherited this large lump sum of money. I can be very specific and say, you know, if this policy pays out, this is what I would want done with that money, and that's the only option. So that's what I wanted to share because I felt it was really important to talk about what fears and worries I had relating to money and the people left behind. And it was triggered by that video I saw of that Zimbabwean couple who were talking about how it's important for your children to look after you and provide for you, because when you're working and sacrificing for them, you're thinking, I hope these children don't forget me one day. It's not that straightforward a topic. You know, that's it's a whole other subject to talk about in terms of black tax, you know. But at the same time, the way I see it is, if you don't look after them, then who's going to look after them? You know, that is just the way it's set up in our culture, you know. And unfortunately, many of our countries, the systems don't work. So like in that video, the father of those children had worked for the National Railways, and he said he'd worked for 30 years. But when it came to retirement, and the pension that he would receive was not even close to enough to live on. So luckily, his children were willing to step in and help out. And also his wife was, you know, she was doing all sorts of business activities on the side. You know, she was cross-border shopping. She would go and buy things from Mozambique, you know, other parts of Zimbabwe, and then she would export things to Cape Town, etc., etc. So the money she earned, as well as what the children were helping with, was enough to keep them comfortable, and they were very grateful. So we can't run away from the fact that we'll probably always have to support and look after elderly parents coming from the kind of countries and economies that we come from. But without suffering too much, we can also look after ourselves and our own children. It's not always going to be possible to save lots of money when you're looking after two households, but you can have some peace of mind and some reassurance by just having a simple financial instrument like an insurance policy. You know, look for insurance policies that you can afford, and just tell yourself, no matter what happens, I will not cancel this policy. I will never ever default on it. I'll make sure I keep paying it. My insurance, my life insurance that I got for myself, because the agency that brought me here, they didn't offer me any benefits. And I think that they only offered health insurance, which was very expensive. It was very, very expensive, that health insurance. And then maybe a year into my contract, they offered us, I think it was accident insurance, which they paid for. So I don't know what, you know, whether they were getting some kind of kickback by having that insurance in place for us. But that's a year into the contract, they wrote to us and said, oh, we got you accident insurance, but no life insurance, just really expensive health insurance. So what I would recommend is, whatever you're earning, as soon as you arrive, get a life insurance policy, protect your children, protect your dependents, and make sure that you are getting as much cover as you can afford. That will give you so much peace of mind, because you'll know that no matter what happens, if I drop dead today, my dependents are cared for, they are looked after, and you know, you can die a happy man or woman. So that's what that's all I have to share with you today. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been helpful to someone. And to those of you who are still working on trying to come here, you know, keep going, keep at it. For me, it's absolutely been worth it. It's opened my eyes. America is a very, very different country to anywhere I've been, and I've been to a few countries. It's very different to anywhere. You know, you'll see what you see on the news, but being here on the ground, living here, is a very different story. It's vast. It's really, really vast. It's so full of opportunity. And yes, you know, like anywhere else in the world, the cost of living has gone up. I don't think that's unique to America. But as a nurse, I can't say that I can't live a comfortable life. I'm very comfortable. And I still see opportunity everywhere. It's really just up to me whether I take those opportunities or not. Even just thinking in a very different way by being here, seeing how Americans function, how they think, what, it opens your eyes. It really, really does. It's very, very different to being in the UK. It's an eye opener. And if you ever get the chance to come here and work here and live here, do it just to open your mind, and I'm not saying that you can't do that anywhere else, but what I'm saying is my experience of being here has been a very positive experience, and it's just made me see the world very differently. I just feel like I can be and do anything I want, and I'm glad that that's something that my children have been able to grow up in and witnessing, because when I talk to them now, I have a 16-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they never ever talk about not being able to achieve anything. When they talk about their futures, they talk about, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be this. And there's no doubt in their minds about that. And I don't even doubt it either, because they're surrounded by people with a can-do attitude. They're surrounded by wealth and plenty. And that's not the only important thing in life. Plenty, wealth, whatever. It's not the only important thing in life. Happiness is important. Peace and contentment, or all those things are important. But for me personally, as a parent, giving my children opportunities and limitless opportunities was important, because if they have that, they can also just choose a simpler life. I'm never going to be pushing them to go and do something that they don't want to, but I want them to know that the world is open to them to do whatever they want, that the world is their oyster, that they can be and do whatever they want. And I feel that being here has done that for them. So if you are wanting to come, be encouraged. You should come, definitely.